What are you thinking as you walk through that, Michael?
That's good. Yeah.
You know, we can hear other things. We're all buddies here, so.
Yeah.
We're a team.
Okay.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another podcast with John Dodds. I'm Tom Pipines, and you can find us at tompipines.com, P-I-P-I-N-E-S, pippindodds.sports, Dodds on Sports, the Tom Pipines Show with John Dodds. We've got more names than we have content. No, that's not true. You and I can talk forever and a day. And specifically right now, we want to briefly talk, and that's kind of hard for us, right, about the 1989 Packers draft featuring one Tony Mandarich. Your recollections, John?
Well, we were talking about this yesterday. 1988 Packers season. The Packers had the number one pick virtually the entire year, tying with the Dallas Cowboys, and they came into the last two games of the year. All they had to do was lose them, and they would have the number one pick. And we were on the Packer Troy Aikman watch. Troy Aikman was the quarterback out of UCLA that would be perfect for the Packers, and we had seen Randy Wright and Don Majkowski, and just really hadn't had a good quarterback since Lynn Dickey retired. So the Packers were playing Minnesota, and they were dominating Minnesota, which was kind of odd. And I was at the Packer game in the press box working the game and kind of sweating it out. There's about 2 minutes to go, and Majkowski throws an interception in return for a touchdown. Minnesota's going to win the game. That would cinch Troy Aikman, his draft position for the Packers. And my dad was helping me that day, and I turned to him, I said, the Packers just are assured of having Troy Aikman. And all of a sudden I looked down at the field, and there was this yellow hanky that was saying there, oh, it's probably offensive holding, no problem. And they said, Keith Millard roughing the passer, and they marched 15 yards off, took the touchdown off the board. Majkowski goes down and scores. They win the game, so now they have to lose the final game at Phoenix. They're playing the Cardinals in Phoenix. And I was watching this game, and it was a road game, so I'm at our fantasy football draft, or our fantasy football championship party, and we're all watching the game, and there was a punt, and I'll never forget this. I've never seen this before or since. There was a punt to Ron Pitts of the Packers, and he caught it at his own 40 and ran up between the hash marks all the way for a touchdown without a Cardinal being in between the hash marks. That Cardinal team mailed it in, didn't care. The Packers win the game. The Packers finish with the second pick, so they can't get Troy Aikman. So then I was watching, I think it was the Holiday Bowl. Georgia was
Only
playing.
you can remember Keith Millard,
Yes.
Ron Pitts up the middle with no opponent in the hash marks. They mailed it in, the fantasy, and now your latest story. That recollection to me is unreal.
I have a very understanding wife. That's all I can say.
Do you remember her name?
Yeah, Sheila.
Very
So
good.
thank you,
Okay, we're
Sheila.
good.
Right. So in the Holiday Bowl, the Packers or the Michigan State Spartans playing Georgia, and
Oh, yeah, I remember that game.
Tony Mandarich made one block where at left tackle he blocked the end into the nose tackle into the other end, knocked them all down, and pointed at him as Blake Ezor ran 10 yards.
Blake Ezor.
I thought, well, maybe there's a silver lining here that Mandarich would be a really good player. So came to draft day, the Packers had the second pick, and Jerry Jones and Dallas took Aikman. They took the quarterback that they wanted, and the Packers took Mandarich. And I know that back in the day, the draft would be all day Monday and part of Tuesday. And since the Packer pick was so early, they could fly in the draft pick to the Packer complex, and they flew Mandarich in. They took Mandarich, they flew him in with his brother, and he was the biggest, to this day, he was the biggest, best developed physical specimen I've ever seen. And the fact that he could play football, I thought this was going to be terrific. And you were there, I remember the time also. Tell me your...
Right. Of course, we've been blessed to have 80 years of covering Packers between us, so we thought for this podcast a little historical perspective. Tony Mandarich, the Man Mountain. Now, back in the day, I was thinner. But, we did our thing, and then we went out in the field and did a stand-up, the usual TV thing at Fox 6. And I said to Tony, hey, I've got this idea. You want to lift me up? And he literally lifted me up and put me on his bicep, probably 190 pounds or whatever at the time, don't I wish now. And we did our little 10-second stand-up, and I said, this guy is unbelievable. He's going to be the greatest ever. Little did we know that he was having a little help. It wasn't all God-given.
Well, I was talking to his brother there. I said, how much does your brother weigh? And he says, Tony weighs 332 pounds. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And he wore this mesh T-shirt, kind of see-through that you could just see, and the guy was just a triangle, and
kind of like us,
just like in our former day. And what clued us, the big clue that this wasn't on the level was he's 332 pounds in April when he was drafted. He holds out and he shows up September 1st at 297 pounds.
Minus the steroids.
And he didn't have any tone to his body. And Tim Harris, the outside linebacker, defensive end, was taking him and just throwing him around like a rag doll. So
wasn't there a game against the Eagles when then the late, great Reggie White, before he came to Green Bay, just tossed him around like a rag doll?
There was. It was, I want to say that was at Philly in 90, 91, right around there, and it was absolutely pathetic. And they tried to play him at guard. They couldn't fit him at all. And
he went on to become a serviceable player, right? But that was the number 2 overall pick. Deion Sanders was there. Barry Sanders was there. They don't get Aikman, but as you said earlier, Ron Wolf said, well, if you get Aikman, you don't get Brett Favre, et cetera. So we know the history there. But, man, what could have been for the Packers?
I maintain, though, looking back, that was the greatest draft pick the Packers ever made, and the most fortunate one, because if they would have taken Barry Sanders or Deion Sanders or Derek Thomas, Lindy and Fonte would have coached for another 10 years. They would have maybe made the playoffs the next year. I remember I interviewed Barry Sanders at the end of that first year. They're up in Green Bay, and it was a very cold game. And he said, I absolutely cannot stand cold weather. And if the Packers would have drafted me, I would not have shown up. Really, I wouldn't have shown up. And I remember thinking, this is maybe a losing battle. This team may never be able to get back if top players like Barry Sanders don't even want to show up in Green Bay because of the weather. So when Ron Wolf, that Mandarich pick led Harlan to make a change, brought Ron Wolf in.
A big move. And then, right, and that begets Mike Holmgren, begets Brett Favre. Wolf at number 4 joined at the hip, right?
So that was the best possible scenario for the Packers. So even though they missed out on Aikman,
short-term pain, long-term gain.
Long-term gain. Favre ended up to be so much better. And a couple years later, the Packers were playing at County Stadium with Jerry Jones, and I get there 2.5 hours before the game, and Jerry Jones stepped right in front of me and started talking. So of course I listen to everything he was saying. He was looking down, and they're warming up. Troy Aikman's warming up, and he said, my personnel guy told me, don't take Troy Aikman, take Tony Mandarich. And he said, why wouldn't I take the quarterback? He said, you're going to take a guy, Mandarich, that you can plug in at offensive left tackle. He's going to be all pro for 15 straight years, and then he's got a ticket to the Hall of Fame. He'll be in Canton. You got to take Tony Mandarich. And Jerry Jones says, no. I'm taking the quarterback. I'm taking Troy Aikman. So, and then years later, I also talked to Tom Bratz, who played Marquette football in the 50s. So Tom Bratz, I said, when you were drafting, if you had the number 1 pick in '89, what would you have looked for? And he said, the one player that I would have taken in that draft wasn't Aikman, it wasn't Mandarich, it was Deion Sanders. He said, Deion Sanders was the greatest player I have ever worked out at any position. He said, that's the guy I would have taken. So there's a lot of things going on in that '89 season, but it sure worked out well for the Packers, because getting Ron Wolf and then getting Favre made up for Aikman. But in 89 and 90, I just couldn't believe the bad luck that I thought it was something that they would never come back from. So what Bob Harlan and Ron Wolf did for the Packers should never be underappreciated.
Absolutely. And I'll never underappreciate your historical perspective, John Dodds, on the Green Bay Packers. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Excuse me, on our podcast. TomPippins.com, Pipines, The Tom Pippin Show with John Dodds, Pippin Dodds on Sports, PippinDodds.com. And a particular thanks, we are loving being here at Enders and Heartland, and Pat Enders as well, and to Mike and Brentley, a part of this podcast team. We're going to have loads of fun and hope you'll share it with us. Thanks, everybody. By the way, so much for a short podcast segment, hey? Good job, Johnny. Okay.